Cool. So today I'm talking to Andy Skipsey. Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really well, thanks, Vic. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good to see you again. It's been a bit of a while.
It has been a while. I think probably the last time was the reunion gig.
It was.
Which was what, about 6 years ago?
Yeah,
which is
well
scary to think that.
Yeah, it's just a bit frightening.
Your hair's grown.
Yes.
I'm still working on mine.
Yeah. Well, keep going. So, first question, Andy, what do you do?
Well, I do music. I'm a bass player, but I do property development and investment as well. So I kind of did photography when I left school. So I've always kind of had an arty, creative side, I guess, but also a practical side, and that's where the property stuff comes in. But there's also a creative element about, what I do with the properties as well. Certainly design interiors and exteriors as well. But music's my first love, but for a lot of people, it's not always possible to make a good enough living, and that's partly the reason I went over to property. But it's in my blood as well. My father was in construction, but my mother's side were in music, so I think I've inherited kind of the both sides of construction and music. So I've definitely tried to incorporate those into my creativity and also earning potential.
Yeah. Cool. So I've known you quite some time, really, haven't I? I think trying to work out how long ago.
I reckon it was 96, not 96. Yeah. 1996.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, when did we? I think it was before that, wasn't it? We were playing.
It might have been. It might have been 90.
No, yeah, it was before that, because you mentioned a reunion gig.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was about 6 years ago, you said, which I think is about right. And that was 20 odd years prior to that we stopped.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a lot earlier than that, isn't it?
Yeah. But
yeah. So I reckon it was early. I reckon it was early 90s, actually.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I can tell you exactly when the reunion gig was, which of course was the greatest band in the world, Red Touch.
Yeah. It was actually it was a good band, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the various incarnations as well of it, which I was privileged to be a part of one of those incarnations. And the reunion gig was actually, I tell you exactly when it was 2017. 2017, does that sound right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So 2016, there we go. So yeah, but we've been making the music a long time, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Yeah. Because that's how I sort of know you as a bass player, really, don't I? But you were doing a lot of stuff before I met you. So I wanted to go back to that, really, because did you start off by learning bass, or did you learn something else first of all?
Yeah, I was at school, and a friend of mine was started learning guitar, and I said, "Oh, my brother-in-law," or I think it was my sister's boyfriend at the time, and he had a bass, a spare bass. So I said to my mate, I said, "I'll learn bass," and as he was learning guitar, and we'll get a band together. Of course, back in those days, it was the coolest thing to do to be in a band, right? And
it was, right.
And at school, so that's how I started, I guess. But I had the family always had piano, which, as I said, because on my mum's side, my grandfather and my grandmother were musical. We had inherited their piano. So I would always, even before bass, I would sit down at the piano and, work out into, intervals and chords and stuff like that without any formal training. I just loved the sound and the resonance of the piano. And that certainly helped me kind of develop my ear. And I've got 4 older sisters as well, and they were into music as we were growing up. So I'd listen to what they were listening to. So I've always kind of had that love of music. And as I said, I think it's genetic, partly anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I'm always interested in like, I speak to quite a few musicians this podcast, and there's often the older sister and the music,
right.
And that's true for me as well. And of course, you're just sort of soaking it up, aren't you? It's not like you're necessarily sitting there listening to it in order to know what's going on. It's just that it's there, and that sort of finds its way into what you're doing. If it's going to motivate you, I think that's really quite important. And I don't know what were your sisters listening to? What sort of music? Can you remember?
They were listening to Pink Floyd, Genesis. I remember my sister playing Genesis. Then there were 3 albums in her bedroom. I was like, wow, what is that? That's really interesting. And the Phil Collins Face Value album, I remember that specifically. But they were into Bob Marley, reggae. But my musical influences are pretty mixed, because when I started learning bass, of course, I got into, listening to funky bass players, Mark King from Level 42. And at that time, bass was on the up in terms of slapping and popping, and there wasn't many people that were doing that, and it was very cool. So I was very drawn to funk music, and so I really loved the rock, but I also loved sort of funk and soul and stuff. So, and I still do today. My record collection is pretty varied, and yes, I've got records, vinyl, which I think I think there was something about growing up in that era when.
Oh my God, yes, definitely.
Which is very special. And I feel for the young guys growing up that maybe don't have that that medium.
Yeah, because the thing is, when you listen to an album, you used to sort of digest it. You would, it wasn't just something that just sort of was being streamed. You didn't know what the lyrics were because lyrics were on the album. So you could really get to know the stuff, and not just that, you got the whole album. There wasn't just one isolated track. So you got a much bigger feel for a band, and I think that is really problematic at the moment because I still do a lot of teaching.
Yeah.
And lots of people that I'm teaching don't know what they're listening to, or they, by their own admission, don't listen to music, which is nonsense because it's going on all the time. And you think that's so peculiar that you're not taking advantage of stuff, particularly if you're learning an instrument. It's like
I guess you have to do your time, really, don't you, in terms of like listening and learning, and which is going to be your chops, which is going to be where your starting point. I do sometimes wonder if there was no reference point, if somebody picked up an instrument with no history or no knowledge of the history, where that would end, where they would end up in terms of, would they be more creative? Because so much of music and life is has been done, and so sometimes I wonder if it would be a good thing if somebody had no musical experience before or exposure. Makes sense. I'm not sure if it would, but it's an interesting thought. What do you think, Vic?
Well, that's a very good point, and I don't think anybody's ever said this actually. So you brought up a really fascinating thing. See, when I teach songwriting, and I do this a lot, when we do blues camp or summer, I teach them how to write songs using things like cut up and stuff. So you can very quickly put together musical ideas. And what happens is a lot of people sort of go, because I explain that this song used this idea, this technique. And of course, for those people, it's like I burst their bubble. Like suddenly it's like, oh my God, I thought that, this song is a masterpiece. And I realized it's sort of, I've been cheated. But of course, you're not being cheated, because what things like cut up does, where you take random stuff and stick it together, is exactly what you do when you come up with ideas.
Yeah.
You're taking things you've already heard and reworking them and reassigning them in such a way that they come out new. So, because I say to people, I have never had somebody write a song that sounds like a Mongolian sheep herder's melody, or some sort of remote Japanese scout, because they've never heard one. So it's not in their head. So what you end up with is a song that sounds part of the culture, which is what you're saying. So if you started off with nothing, it would be very different and probably not very accessible for everybody else, because there's no references that people can grab hold of. It's like watching a film and it having no references that you can understand. It just becomes weird.
I suppose that's, you'd be pioneering in a way, whether you knew it or not. You'd be, and it's always difficult, isn't it? Because you want to do something, or I certainly do, that hasn't been done before. You want to do something that's different, but it's also true to yourself, because, and that's where the beautiful journey of creativity and exploration comes, when you're trying to dig into the well, but also look around you and say, well, am I just copying other people, or where does that inspiration come from?
Well, let's think about what we did with blues with Red Touch, because I think this is quite an interesting thing. So Red Touch, it obviously was sort of already in existence by the time you'd come in. And I'd been in a band called Bravura before that, which was a reggae band. So it was interesting talking about reggae. And when I was in Bravura, we had, out of the four of us, there were three songwriters. And one of them, the bass player, Brian Early, was fantastic and very eccentric. And I learned a lot of my craft from Brian. Julie was really good, but she was much more classically trained. So, by the time we put everything together, and she was sort of a multi-instrumentalist. So we were using reggae as a basis, but we were feeding into it lots of other musical styles. So by the time, of course, we get to Red Touch, it becomes this sort of eclectic mix, as you remember. So we could have, there'd be a funk song, with some rock element in there. There'd be a reggae sort of style thing with something else going on, and we obviously had a lot of backing vocals and stuff like that, right? So, but what was going on there was that there was this sort of melting pot of ideas all the time. And also every member of the band brought something to it, didn't they? So I might, Nick Hughes might have had an idea for something, but everybody then pitched in. The same thing, if I come up with an idea for something, then everybody would pitch in. And obviously there were certain incarnations where we had horns as well, didn't we? The horn section. So I think that, you're part of a collective environment, and that is really where things happen.
I think that is very special. And a lot of bands that I've been involved in, there'll be one songwriter and here's the song, kind of learn it, and which is okay. But when you have that, as you say, collective, and the freedom and the trust as well, when you're like, okay, this is my idea, but somebody's modified it. Am I okay with that? Is that okay? And it's like, and when you've got that nice relationship, either in the writing session or in the recording session as well, because things can change then as well, then that's really special. And I think that collaboration, and I loved Red Touch because of that as well, because there was different styles, there was different sort of personalities and different songs, and it was great. And I really enjoyed relearning the songs for the
yes. Well, that was interesting. That was an interesting experiment, wasn't it?
Yeah,
because we had one rehearsal, and we hadn't played for 20 odd years, right? We had one rehearsal without the complete band. So it's just a rhythm section rehearsal, right? So it was you, Brad, Nick, myself. And then I did a rehearsal with the girls. And then the first time we all actually physically got together was when we did the gig.
Yeah.
And we sort of ran through. And of course, going through those songs again, because we all sort of prepped up on the sort of set and stuff beforehand. But there were bits of it where I was like, I don't remember what happened here. And I was like thinking, well, hang on a minute, but I wrote this. I can't remember what the chords were. But Nick would turn around and go, no, it was this chord. I remember, because we also used some very bizarre sort of voicings of chords and stuff, didn't we? So it was great fun. But what struck me, because actually Amber said this as well, she said, my God, I forgot how good we were.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, these are really great songs. With that chance of stepping back and not hearing the mistakes that you knew that were in the song, if you see what I mean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you were listening to them like they were different people, because we probably are different people from what we were back then. That was an extraordinary experience, I thought. And that gig was wonderful, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gave me goose pimples, that gig, when you play and you're like, oh, as you say, this is really good. And, and the connection that we had. And I think music is wonderful for that, in terms of like, a great feel good factor. And there's almost no feeling like it, is there, when you do?
No, I don't think there is.
Just going back to the writing thing, though, I think when you start off or learning and writing, when you first start off, you're going to have to learn the Beatles songs, or the kind of standard stuff. But as you go on in your musical career, you're always going to end up at jazz.
Yes. There's some element of it. Yes.
Yeah.
No,
me and my other half, Joe, we always joke about, oh, you're in your jazz years, because you've played everything else, you've learned everything else, and then you're like, right, I'm going to have to go where I haven't been before, and that's when the jazz years kick in, which is either good or bad, because sometimes I struggle to listen to some of the music that I used to listen to, because I've broken it. It's been broken down. I understand the chords and the bass line and the interplay and the rhythms and stuff like that. And I've heard it so many times. And so when I say that can sometimes be a sad thing, because it's like, that innocence when you first hear a song and you haven't learned it and it's got that magic. So sometimes breaking it down, you can lose the magic, and that's where people go to jazz. I'm not sure, if keeping that first love of that song or that melody, but it's a test of a great song or a great album if you can keep going back to it and keep putting it on, saying, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, well, this is interesting, because you've mentioned several things here which I think are really important for people that are creative, writing music and everything. You mentioned the Beatles. Even if the Beatles weren't your go-to band, when it comes to songwriting, oh my God, it's just like, it's all there. It's all there, and you can go back and discover something new in it. And I do a songwriting thing online, most sort of once a month generally. And I've just done 2 on the Beatles, 2 sessions on the Beatles stuff. One of them was, just them using very simple ideas, very simple arpeggios and stuff. And how do you make that sound so not only good, but iconic?
Yeah.
Some sort of little arpeggio line that could become obladi oblada bass line, or it could be Day Tripper, and it's just an arpeggio really from a chord, and you think, but it sounds, once you've heard it, you can't forget it. Type of idea. It's the mark of a great line. And the other little tricks that went on with the lyric writing and everything, and it's literally layer upon layer upon layer of fantastic ideas. So they are a band that you could come back to and listen to with a different ear, and you can find something new. And I would say that's true as from a guitarist point of view of Hendrix as well. You can come back into a Hendrix song and think, I've never noticed that bit before.
Yeah,
I think that's unusual, actually.
And I suppose it's reflected in their success and their their standing in musical history. I do wonder whether they used all the good melodies. Do you know what I mean? That though, I know.
No, I don't think they did. And I would say that's also true with Bob Marley. Because what the thing about Bob Marley, like you mentioned reggae, but when you've got a band who can throw, or a songwriter who can throw a melodic idea in at the end of a song that could have been a song on its own.
Yeah.
That is just like, and Bob Marley does that. You've got this fabulous song, and as it's going out, he sings another bit that is so good it could have been a song on its own.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't want to wait in vain. There's a melody as it goes out, which is fantastic. So I think that's the thing. When people are really producing great ideas, it's like you can't turn the tap off.
Yeah.
And you just get lots of ideas.
There
was a story about, well, in fact, I knew somebody who met Prince when Prince was sort of in his heyday. And at this point, so Prince, we're talking about, I don't know, I was trying to think about the years. It must have been around about the time we were playing, actually. So early 90s, early 90s. And this guy said that Prince, by that time, had a back catalogue of unrecorded songs, or songs that were recorded but never been released. And he said he had 500 songs. And I could believe that.
Yeah.
I could believe that is possible. That early on, so God knows what it was like by the time he died, how many songs that he had.
Yeah.
Already, they were created, but they just weren't released.
Yeah.
So I think.
Yeah, another amazing, gifted artist. And with just amazing songs, and I think the creative process that that we are involved in, it's where does that come from? And I suppose for myself, I'm Christian, I have a faith, that we are made in the image of God, and because God is creative, we can be creative. So I think if you can tap in and you understand that you have the ability to create, to make something new that hasn't existed before, and then the world is your oyster in a way. So
Yeah.
it's how you tap into it, I guess. And the whole thing about sound, when you start banging things when you're a child, or when you shake something, and then that the rhythm as well. This is all part of the creation, or part of our experience, our human experience, which in a way music transcends that, doesn't it? It's kind of almost, it is a spiritual thing.
Yeah, I would say it is. It's certainly something that's not really knowable, and I mean that in the, I think it's far too complex for us to get from any logical perspective. We can sort of create maps about music and what music does and all the rest of it, and what is the experience of music. But to be honest, it's not really what it is. It's only just sort of map. So tell me, because you brought up the sort of Christian stuff, because you did a lot of Christian rock music stuff, and you played some mega gigs. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in that, because I remember, I think it was one of the first times I met you. You just come back from, I don't know, was it Berlin or somewhere you played? And it was just an enormous gig. It was just mind blowing. So tell me about how you got involved in that.
Well, I became a Christian when I was 13, and again, that was via my sisters, because my eldest two sisters were very straight-laced, went to Sunday school and all that, but the younger two, they're all older than me, but the younger two of the four kind of went off the rails a bit, and they got into drugs and just bad stuff. Nothing particularly bad, nasty, but they became Christians, and I saw such a change in their lives. As a sort of 12, 13-year-old, I thought there must be something in this, because instead of coming home drunk or high, or they'd come home and knock on the door and tell me about Christ, and I was like, wow, this is such a change in their lives. So that was, really my Christian faith and the music were kind of, we're on a joint path together. And they started up a youth club, or a Christian youth kind of cafe, and they invited a guy called Noel Richards to come down and do some songs. And I was there as, like I say, a 12, 13-year-old, admiring this guy playing guitar and doing these songs. And from that point, Noel then used to come into my school and do assemblies, because back then it was law that you had to have a Christian element to the assembly. The teachers were kind of like struggling, or trying to find, content or people that could bring Christian element to the assembly. So Noel used to come in, every few months and do some songs and explain something about a biblical story or whatever. And so I kind of got to know him through that. And then also the church I was going to, Noel would come along and do some worship as well. So all that, through all those years, I was learning the bass, and I think I was getting better. And one day Noel approached me and said, do you want to be part of my wider sort of music and worship team? And so that was how it started. And there was a number of bass players that Noel would call upon, and other musicians as well. But as time went on, the band got tighter, and I became the sort of regular bass player in that band. And we started off just really quite small, just doing small gigs, but it ended up we did like I say, we did Berlin, we did toured in America and Europe, a festival called Love Europe, and we also did Wembley Arena and Wembley Stadium as well, which those were amazing gigs. We did the Albert Hall as well, so it was an amazing journey that we were on, and very sort of proud and privileged to have been part of that journey. And because also it wasn't, as I said before, the musical part of it and then the spiritual part of it, when they join together, I think there's even more power. I mean, music is spiritual and supernatural in its in its element, but to when you bring in the spiritual side of it, and people responded really well to it, and Noel was very gifted in leading people in worship into God's presence, and so to be involved in that was an amazing privilege. But just one thing I wanted to say as well, which I've noticed has been a theme through your podcast, as before Noel asked me to be part of the regular band, I put the bass down for about 6 months. I stopped. I was doing other things. I was doing a church course, Bible course, and I just put the instrument down. I think when I came back to it, I had a new, kind of excitement about it, a new, impetus or whatever and I think that is a common theme. Is that right?
It is. Because there's something about, doesn't matter how we label this, direction, intention, or something, something that causes us to make a journey that has got some sort of directionality to it. And I think one of the problems, which I think is happening a lot with kids, is that they don't have a reason to play. So, like you're saying, being in a band was the coolest thing at the time, It was almost like it created something about your personality. It was an important ingredient. Right? I don't see that. I don't see that now. I don't see people sort of going, so-and-so's just started a band as if it was something incredible, which is what used to happen. And it didn't matter how bad you were, because obviously some of the greatest bands aren't good when they start, right? It becomes something. So you were saying about putting the bass down, and when you come back to it, because there's a reason, it's transformative, right? And that's one of the things I have a little bit of a problem with the way that I see people being. I've noticed a few sort of psychological things that are very different with people. Now, some things I've never seen before. And I've been teaching a long time, and I'm thinking we need a little bit of some of those early things, something about a belief in something beyond yourself, which is, we're saying, even if it's just this, even if it's in something like you're creating, and that's beyond you, but everything's sort of so like it's all a bit logical, and it's lost its magic, it's lost its sparkle, and I think that's just such a shame. I do actually think we've lost something in our own humanness somehow. We've lost a little bit of our spirit, So very interesting. You should say that you'd put it down and you came back to it, and then it became part of, it became a vehicle. Really, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the thing about something that's artistic.
Maybe it's God, the universe, however you want to refer to a higher force power, testing you to see whether you really want it. It's like, because when you put it down, it's like, okay, and then are you going to pick it up again? Because I'm sure hundreds of people who have bought a guitar, had a few lessons, and then it stayed in the cupboard. That wasn't me.
Yeah. I know that even some very famous guitar players stop for a while. But I think because what we tend to do is that we think that playing a guitar is something that we can just learn by rote, and it's all very logical, or any musical instrument. And it's not. Because if that was the case, you can't explain how you can get these child prodigies. It doesn't explain how somebody could be playing for, I've had some people who had lessons for a couple of years, and they were just, you know, bit bored, and then suddenly something happens,
right.
and they're transformed. I've had somebody learning to play guitar and sing, and they couldn't sing in tune, and it was all a bit like that. And one week they turned up, walked into the room, sat down and started singing, and it was like, what happened? You know, somebody had abducted this person, and somebody else was there because they could sing. And it was literally one particular week they turned up, and they just got better and better and better. Now this person, you know, is a singer-songwriter. He makes his living by performing. He's a solo, you know, and he's got a fabulous voice, writes great songs. And you go like, well, you've never seen that coming.
Yeah.
Because it didn't do the logical vertical type, we do this and we do that. It just exploded. It's what they would have said was a revelation, you know.
Was there a reason for that? Did they say, do you know what, I've been practicing, or I've been listening, and I've had,
no, they just kept at it.
Yeah. It
was a consistent journey for them. But I do think.
But you noticed the jump.
Yes. Oh, it wasn't even a jump. It was quantum.
Right.
It was the best way. It went from one, as I said, it was like somebody had stolen this person and put somebody else in their body.
But maybe it was always there, but they.
Oh yes, it was. But that's what it was like. This is what I'm saying. It's obviously there, but what I'm getting, you know, is this sort of thing like there's something beyond the mundane in a lot of these circumstances. And, you know, whatever you want to label that as, it doesn't matter, you know. To me, I like to think of something bigger than me. Right? I like to think of something that's unknowable, right? Because even when you're dealing with music, having something that's unknowable answers a lot of questions about things. Because I even think music is unknowable, right?
Yeah.
I think even songs, when they turn up, they're not yours. They already are what they are, but they just come through you, right? I mean, I often quote Keith Richards' thing about the songs already exist. You've just got to hook them in with your guitar, and what's good about that is it stops you thinking. It gets the ego out of the way.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's important when you talk about, you know, like your faith. It's not you. It's a spiritual experience, right?
Yeah.
You know, and when these things happen, and you're, as you said, you're being tested. That's the type of thing it's like, because it's not about you. It's about whatever is coming through, and I think that's the power of music and art. You know, it's the same as being an actor or whatever, an artist or a dancer or something. It's something is beyond yourself, or beyond the way that you can rationalize yourself. And I think that, you know, sorry.
No, I think, you know, if I'm honest, I've probably, you know, looked at musicians, you know, and people being on stage and playing a guitar. It probably was from an ego point of view to start off with, you know.
To start with, yes.
That probably was a motivation. But as you say, as you grow in music and your musical knowledge, or your wonderment, you know, of wow, this is something beyond me, then the ego does dissolve away somewhat, you know. And I think that's a healthy journey to be on. I mean, I don't know whether Noel stole this or whether he created it, but he would say that music is the language of heaven. You know, and that's always stuck with me, because it's like, wow, yeah, there's something, as you say, that transcends our understanding. And you know, and not only that, in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, you know, how did God create the world? Or he spoke. Sound. When you study cymatics, you know about cymatics with the frequency that goes into the plate and the island filings, and it creates different shapes for the different frequencies. Just again a kind of a supernatural element to it, which I think sometimes we've lost. And when you said you're not seeing the passion of or desire for music in youngsters, maybe that spiritual element has been sidelined, and when you look at a lot of the great musicians, many of them came through churches. They cut their teeth in the church band, whether it be Pentecostal. A lot of the black guys, came through that route, and and so the spiritual element of music, which started in churches, and maybe we've lost that. Sorry.
Yeah, because I was talking to Ben Thomas about a year ago. That's the Adele's guitarist, and he was saying that a lot of the guys that he works with in America with Adele, he said they're all being trained. They come from gospel bands, and he said their musicianship is just jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
He said what it is, you can get good technical players, but they've got another gear. And I thought that was really, really, really well put. Now, of course, when you look at the tradition of classical music, that comes from the church as well. A lot of these, Bach is a really good example of that. But I mean, Purcell, Handel, a lot of their work was to do with the church and writing spiritual music, Vivaldi and everything. So it in fact, the whole formulation of Western music is based in religious works, and I think, this is important, really. It's about, that's, I think, where the depth of everything comes from. That's the point. It's just not about the ego, and it's not about the logic. We use the logic to map. We can think about chords and scales and, harmony and all the rest of it, but ultimately, you play something because it feels right, and it is right, and it inspires you to do something in a particular way, And I think that's so important. Yeah. So interesting points.
Going back to jumps, when it was at the end of my time playing with Noel, I was asked to play in a touring musical, and which I took it because I'd never done that before, and it was it was an opportunity, and I wanted to do more music, and well, fortunately, I'd done my homework. But when I got in the room with the other musicians, and they started playing, I was like, wow, these guys are amazing. And I had to up my game, during that time of playing. I played in 2 touring musicals. I had to up my game and my, and that was, a kind of jump or a leap that I had to take. But when we get exposed to other players and other, sort of musicians, and whether and there's a guy in the church at the moment I'm playing, and he tells me about some of the gospel bass players, and I'm like, wow, and he's like, these guys are absolutely amazing, and which is always a challenge, because I'm like, okay, I want to be as good as those guys, but then I don't necessarily do what they do, and that's where you bring your own experience and your own to the table. Yeah, and that was the thing with the musical as well. These guys were fantastic musicians, but I thought, well, do you know what? I've got the spirit. I felt I was bringing the spiritual side, faith, and I always played every note, with that intensity as unto God, and that, rather than just, oh yeah, I'm just playing it up, I'm just here, just filling in a chair for somebody, or just to entertain the people. I was like, no, this is more for me, and I want to give to the people, of course, and to the band, but also unto God. And I think that maybe because of the secularization of society, maybe we have lost that somewhat,
Yeah. See, I see a lot of this from within education anyway.
Right.
But, you said an interesting point about when you were at school, that assemblies, there was a religious aspect to it, and I think it's a little bit hit and miss at the moment, because it certainly got to a point where there wasn't any, right? And then I think that, there was some sort of bringing back of, a religious aspect into a school assembly, whether that's Christian or something else. But I do think it's important for people, because it's a moral compass. But it also, I think, is important for people to understand that when people made decisions in the past, there was another dimension to why people thought in the way they did. And I've often sort of thought about, I mentioned Bach, but Bach was one of these incredibly devout people. So when he wrote pieces of music, the music is utterly infused with biblical references. If he's writing a biblical, putting a biblical text to something like he's doing the Messiah or whatever, but it's cleverly done. It's done with numbers, and it's done with where he positions the sharp sign and all this sort of thing. And it's so utterly brilliant. Not only is the music fantastic, there's another layer to it. And you go like, this guy is a genius on more than one level. It's just utterly mind-blowing. But to get to that, you have to realize that people had that way of thinking, that, as you say, everything had a spiritual dimension to it. Everything. Yeah. So you didn't just, you could have just appeared to knock out a piece of music, but I mean, it wasn't just, it was just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, the motivation is important. And I think architecture is a classic one. You look at some buildings, and you're like, how did that get built? And there was no spiritual element to it. It was just a piece of paper or on a computer.
Yeah,
it was for money. Whereas you go back and you look at some of the classical, architecture and buildings, and we do marvel at them because they were built to a standard and for a higher purpose, which I think is what you.
No, absolutely. I do a lot of walking, and I walk a lot of pilgrimage trails, right? And I'm doing this walk on the South Downs, and of course you come across these incredibly old churches. I mean, just they're dating back to the 12th century, 11th century, some even earlier than that. And you go inside them, it's just astonishing. It changes you. It changes you.
Yeah,
because they're utterly peaceful. And you also have the presence of the fact that you are in a long line of a lot of people who've gone in there, and it's all inspiring, but it's simple as well. And you think that from the point of the architecture of those buildings, they're built with such devotion to the building. And you can sense it, even though it's, they're over 1,000 years old.
Yeah, we've definitely lost that. And I mean, being somebody that's done quite a bit of construction stuff as well, and realizing how long things can take and how much, as you say, intricacy is involved. You look at these buildings and also pieces of music. How long sometimes you've spent on a piece or learning your craft, and it's like, wow, there was something about that was beyond money or beyond ego that caused. Yes. I think the eternal perspective is an interesting one, because if you think this is it and there's nothing more, then why not? Why would you build something or construct anything that has, lasting, longevity or lasting meaning. So when you've got an eternal perspective, I think it does change things. Another thing that has been lost. But
yes, I totally agree with you. So tell me about Explode the TV.
I've been involved in Explode the TV since 2011. And it's myself, Bentley Browning, who's the singer, and we've got a new drummer who's just come on board this year, Chris, and Max on guitar. For a long time we didn't have a guitarist, which was interesting because it was just a bass singer and a drummer, and I obviously at that point I was splitting frequencies into guitar amp and bass amp and putting some effects on to fill out what the guitar was doing, a bit royal blood.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, which was great fun. But now we've got a guitarist, it's taken a bit of pressure off of me. I don't have to. the gigs aren't quite so busy. It's just mainly bass, but that was a fun period. But yeah, I've been involved since 2011, and we've done lots of gigs. We've done 3 albums. We're in the middle of kind of recording singles, which are going to hopefully end up being an album over this year. And we've recorded 4, and we've released 2 so far. So yeah, we found a really good producer in London and in a studio, and that situation's working out really well. And I think it's if you're an artist and you are recording, you need to find somebody and a space that works for the creative, and also just getting along with each other in the space, and a producer that understands what you want but won't necessarily kowtow to everything you say, but bring their own flavor to it. And we found somebody like Henry who's really doing the job for us, so that's exciting.
That is a very important point, because obviously we used to record down at Graham's, didn't we, down in
which is a great space. Great.
It was. I mean, Graham still does a lot of mastering work and stuff like that. But again, you need a certain type of person who fits that bill, who's not necessarily the same as you, but they have to be part of the missing bit of the jigsaw puzzle. Again, we're back to that thing of, when you have an idea, you've got to let that idea go, because it's not yours anyway, but the same thing, there's still a bit of directioning that needs to be done with certain things. So you need somebody who can do that sort of production work for you, maybe give you some sort of idea.
He works really quickly as well. Things I've noticed about a lot of the younger guys producing and engineering, they're very quick with Logic or Pro Tools, or so that's definitely helpful, I think, for the creative flow. And I do see the recording process as part of the creative flow, the writing process, but also the recording process, which is important. Totally.
I mean, there's a lot of songs that you could, epic sort of songs that you look at and you think, well, really, it's the performance that makes this song.
The take.
And then you get, and you get other songs where it's actually the song. It's one of these that it's difficult to break that song. So that's an interesting sort of beast in itself, really, isn't it? When you look at it, that a song, sometimes it's the performance of the song that does the thing, but other times it is the song.
I mean, when I first joined the band, I suppose it was one of the first bands, or that where we really just got in a room and wrote the song in the room, rather than somebody coming in and saying, this is my song, learn it. It was like, and that was really, it still is a really organic process, which I love. And maybe I'm able to do it now because I've experienced on bass, and maybe I couldn't have done it 20 or 30 years ago, but because of
I don't know. Because the interesting thing about bass is brilliant to write from. Because you don't have to worry about, it could literally be like boom, 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 right? So you don't have to worry about how fancy the chords are. You don't get caught in the guitarist's, technical cul-de-sac of, I've got this fancy riff, and no, you don't want any of that. You just want something really, really simple, and then you can build it up. So bass is a great way of writing, and it's interesting that, obviously when we were doing the stuff at Red Touch, obviously most of the things were written from the guitar initially, but now I wouldn't do that, I don't think. Again, when we used to do all the stuff in Bravura, that could come in from any direction. It could come in from bass, it could come in from a keyboard, it could come in from guitar, it could come in from a vocal idea. But I think it is actually much easier, as you say, when you get more comfortable with an instrument. You can do all sorts of stuff, like just don't use that instrument.
Yeah. When you've got the root note, and this is what I was saying to Bentley during that period, we wrote the Normalized album. I said to him, well, look, I'll play the root notes and you can sing whatever melody you want over the top of it. As you said, exactly. You're going to play a minor chord, you're going to be limited somewhat in that chord. So it is a bit more of a blank canvas if writing with a bass. So I
think it is. And also, and of course, if you start with the bass and drums, you've got the whole machine working and you haven't added anything on the top,
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't actually have to add anything on the top, which is another good thing about not having guitar. Because as you say, your guitar can stick a thing in a box just by what you do with it. If you take that out of the mix and you've just got bass and drums, and then you think guitar comes now, right?
Yeah.
So you can start putting the guitar in certain parts and then leaving it out in others. I think that's I think it's a good way.
It's interesting that some of the greatest songwriters have been bass players.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah, Sting, I guess, and Paul McCartney, and
I would add Prince to that, because Prince was a hell of a bass player. So even though you might say, well, Prince is more of a guitar player type of thing, but I mean, if you could play bass as good as Prince could play, you could obviously, that's all in your head. You could do whatever. You could play, if you were coming up with a musical idea and you were hearing it as a piano part, because you could. I mean, he could have done. Yeah. He could have heard it as a drum part.
Did you see Prince's performance from the Super Bowl?
Yes, when he does play that funky music.
I was blown away by that, because it was raining. It was raining. I don't know if you remember, it was raining, and I don't know if you've ever played outside when it rains. It's really not very pleasant, and
right. Is that the one where he does play that funky music, or is that another one?
I can't remember. He did a medley of his songs, of course.
Okay, all right. It might be different.
Yeah, but if you get a chance to go and watch it, I was just blown away. I mean, I know the Super Bowls are kind of a performance thing more than a kind of a musical thing, but I was blown away because I thought this guy's really kept it together and done it. Yeah,
but very odd. But very very odd.
But maybe that's part of why he was so great at being creative.
Totally. Totally. And I think because we always sort of think that somebody is, when somebody's that creative, I think they do inhabit a different space mentally. And when you get people back project things about people, they weren't very nice because of blah. It's like, well, it's all very well you're saying that, but it's all out of context. And obviously, I know a couple of people that met Prince, and some, for some people, he just wouldn't talk to them at all. And for other people, he would. He could be quite charming.
Yeah.
But it just depends where he was in himself, I guess. and where everything was with everything, to whether he was not,
That's creative people, though, isn't it?
I think so.
When you're in a band with somebody that's creative, that's really quite odd and creative. Sometimes it can be really hard to hold them down, or to get them to live a normal existence in a way. And when you're trying to have a band and pull gigs together, that can be quite interesting. I've always seen myself as like the organizer or the support of the front man, and kind of the more level-headed part of being a player, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting, that, isn't it? Because sometimes I think, when I sort of look back on myself, I think, okay, I'm not quite as volatile as I used to be, but I don't think I was that bad. But I worked with some people that were difficult, and as I say, Brian, who I mentioned earlier, was eccentric but brilliant. But again, you had to understand how they operated in order to sort of function with him. But he was, sadly, he's not with us anymore. But,
right.
But yeah, he was such a talent. Yeah, awesome stuff. Well, Andy, we've been chatting for about an hour, so
great. Yeah,
that was wonderful to speak to you. There's a lot of really interesting things there. I'm doing this for people who are interested in sort of creativity, because again, you can't just sort of format it. It's just like things come up in conversation. You brought up a couple of things which I think are really different and important for people, and people can take out from that.
Yeah, I think one of the final things I wanted to say about the love of music, or people losing it, is and you might disagree with me on this, but the element of analog recording. We received all our music when we were growing up analog, and that's why I still love records, because it's analog. Especially the old ones that were recorded that way. I do think there's a spiritual or something that's that gets captured on the analog and not on the digital. That's just my theory, and that's all it is.
Well, there's a lot of people think that.
Yeah. And so maybe we have to go back to to that, but it's hard, and because technology is moving.
I think that's a good point, because I don't even think it's to do with recording, because I actually think that a lot of creative processes need to be analog. Like, for instance, if you're writing a book, it's actually really good to write it on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil. After you've done that, you can do whatever you want with it. The other thing that I do is I sometimes dictate it. Now, of course, that you could go, well, that's digital, but that could have been analog. That could have just been recording it into a tape player, right, to capture your thoughts. But I think the problem with the sort of digital thing is, I am very aware of how technology can rob you, and you end up doing what the technology does best, instead of the creative process of making the technology work as a tool. It's a different thing. And you see it in recording. So if you record analog, you might then put it onto a computer and do all the rest of it, But if you're recording in a way that you would have done analog, that is different from cutting and pasting. Yeah. It's a different experience.
Different process. Yeah.
Yeah. And you because you don't get a performance, or it's difficult to get a performance if you're not doing it in an analog way. In other words, you're playing and there's a take, right? There's a take being made. And I think there is something in that, most definitely.
Yeah, the last recording which we did a week or so ago, I went in and laid down the bass in 2 takes. First one was pretty much there, and the second one was there. And it's not to blow my own trumpet. It's just I don't want to do the cutting and pasting.
No.
Which the producer was like, "Oh, let's do the first verse."
Yeah.
I said, "No, he just let it roll." To be fair, and I did.
That is the point I'm getting at. It doesn't feel real somehow. And you think of all the great songs that have got mistakes in them.
Yeah,
there are loads of them.
Yeah,
right.
Added the
and
character.
it never stopped it being a problem. The songs with the out of tune bass in it, right? You know, Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girl and stuff like that. It's actually part of the song. It gives it the thing. You know, there's Led Zeppelin songs where there's a mistake on the guitar. There's, you know, there are Led Zeppelin songs with a squeaking foot, you know, bass drum pedal.
Yeah.
You know,
all that's been taken out of our listening experience. So when we do it, we think, oh, is that a mistake? So it's almost like people have been programmed that that's a mistake, or that shouldn't be there, and then you get very clinical recordings and music, you know, production. So
totally. All right, mate.
Great to
talk with you soon.
Good
to see you. Thanks.
All righty, take care. Ciao.
And you.